So first of all, I want to welcome everybody today. It's exciting for us to get to do this corporate Q&A, which means we're going to talk about real topics that affect our corporate leaders that we work with, and then folks that we may work with in the future. So hopefully everybody had a great Memorial Day weekend, barbecues, like I said before, maybe some trips out to the lake or whatever your family does on Memorial Day. And then I would expect that everybody had an opportunity to think about why we have this holiday and take a minute to reach out, or at least think about those who will never get to spend that time with their families again. And Joe Lynn, who is our director of marketing, corporate marketing at the program, shared something with me. And this really just was powerful. And I tried to control my emotional response to her comment. She said that our Memorial Day post gained more attention than any other post that she could find in our history on social media. And when she said that, I was like, wow, that's more meaningful than any sales video that we could put together or services video. And it really meant a lot. So a lot of our clients reached out. Thank you, if you're on this call, for reaching out and just saying they were thinking about us over the weekend and thinking about our teammates that we might have lost. So if you are in the military or a veteran and you're on this call, the same goes to you. We know that you have people that you are thinking about. Today, we have our founder, CEO, and the co-author of the program book on. And the reason that we brought Eric on today is to talk about toughness, and specifically both emotional and mental resiliency and those components of toughness. And so the reason we decided to make that the topic of our Q&A today is because a lot of the questions that we received in preparation for this session were centered around conflict resolution in the workplace and how do you manage those tough conversations. And so the first question that we always ask is, when somebody confronts another person in the workplace, is okay, well, let's go back to our values here, which should be reinforced by our standards. And we manage those disagreements just based on who we are. And so I'll kind of start off today's discussion by just describing, how I would respond to a situation where maybe there is a heated discussion and we're disagreeing over something as common as a way of doing business with a client. And so the first question I would ask is, what is our standard for this? And implied in that question is, do we have one? And a lot of the companies that we work with, we run into problems every day where it's like, there is no standard for this. Okay, well, then we need to go back and as a team talk about what is our standard for this type of situation. How would we recommend, or how would we want everybody to respond when a client asks for this specific service? So first, what is our standard? Then, has that standard been clearly explained? So before you can ever think about holding somebody accountable or holding the team accountable, it's explain those standards in detail. And then after the standards were explained, did we train to the standard? Did we actually get our group together, our small team, or maybe the entire company, and train effectively to the standard? I'll steal a quote from one of our partners, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. Too much training is done in the abstract. And I almost feel like we talk about this with every client that we have, is that you can't talk about it. You can't just talk about it. We have to train to it. And a perfect example for the military audience out there, because I know we have a few on this call right now, is task condition standard. And it's spelled out in detail in that document how you train for every task that a military person is supposed to be able to do. And if we haven't done that, if we haven't trained to the standard, we cannot expect anybody to meet or exceed those standards. So then we get the conflict. We have a situation where we had that heated discussion. If if the answer is yes to we have a standard, we've explained it clearly, and we've trained to it, the next question I would ask is, have I gotten a commitment from my teammates, from all the members of this team, that we're going to meet and exceed that standard? If that conversation hadn't occurred, we're missing a critical component to being an effective team, to being an elite team. That conversation could sound something like this. We've all decided these are the standards that are going to reinforce our core values. Are we going to commit, each individual on this team, to meeting or exceeding those standards every day? Everybody looks each other in the eye. We do commit to doing that. Are there any reservations? No. Okay, good. And then the next level, and this is something that many companies don't do, is look left and look right and hold each other accountable to those standards as well. So not only are you committing to meeting them, you're committing to holding each other accountable to meeting them also, which is uncomfortable. And Cap, I would defer to you on this. Once we've checked those boxes and we've explained the standard exists, we've trained to the standard, we get a commitment from our team, a verbal commitment. Let's go so far as to ask for it. At that point, we still have conflict. So we still have a heated discussion. Where does that come from? Why do people get heated in the workplace?
Yeah. Corey, you know what, maybe, and I will answer that, as I was listening to hear you speak about our values and making sure that we have values as a team first, and then having standards that reinforce those values. I always think of Fred, our good friend and partner, Fred Kaufman. I'd certainly recommend to our audience to Google Fred Kaufman. Conscious Business is a book that changed my life. I don't say that with any hyperbole. I mean, it changed my life. So I would recommend it. Again, Conscious Business. And I've heard Fred talk about this a number of times, and it really struck a chord with me that when we think about standards, they are not, these are the standards you're supposed to do. Instead, we should think of them as, this is what we're committing to each other. These are our commitments we're making to each other. So in what you had just talked about, right, Corey, about having your team there and saying, hey, do you commit to this? What I would maybe just tweak a little bit on that is, do you commit? Will you commit to your teammates? Will you make these commitments to your teammates? Of which, of course, as the team leader, I'm one of those teammates. But this is not what we're making. These aren't commitments we're making to the organization, some sort of nebulous organization out there, those guys. This is what we're committing to for each other here. And then when we hold people accountable to them, it's not just the leader doing it, because these are commitments we made, all of us, to each other. So that makes it a little easier for the group, not just the leader, to hold people accountable, number one, because the person next to me is not honoring their commitment to me. Number one. Number two, we're still going to have, when you have those conversations about, look, you're not honoring your commitment. These are commitments that we made, all of us made. You made this commitment, and you're not honoring that commitment. I think educating our teammates on the fact that not honoring that commitment, it undermines trust. And without trust, we have either no relationship, if it's egregious enough of a lack of commitment, or at the very least, any breaking of a commitment on any level will undermine trust, so that our relationship is going to be something less than 100%. It's not going to be as good as what it could be. And that's why we have to have this discussion, because if all of us can have the best relationships that we can have on this team, man, can our team achieve great things here. So I just want to highlight that to the audience, number one. Number two, look, we're still going to have conversations with people that will get us. We all have natural human emotions, but the one that typically leads to poor outcomes is anger. We're all going to get into and have those moments where we feel angry. As you talked about it, we're in heated discussions. And having, us talked about this prior to today's conversation, I shared a little story that I put something together that I'd like to share with the audience. And let me share how you climb Mount Everest. Okay. This is the north side of the mountain. I climbed it a few years ago. You arrive at base camp at 17,000 feet. To put base camp in proportion or in relation to you to something you might find familiar here in the United States, there is no mountain in the continental United States higher than 17,000 feet. That's base camp on the north side of Mount Everest. On the Tibetan side or Chinese side of the mountain. So you arrive at base camp and you have to spend 2 weeks just acclimatizing to that high of an altitude. Now, over the next 7 weeks or so, you conduct 3 acclimatization hikes to altitudes lower on the mountain than the summit and return to base camp to recover in between them before you attempt the summit. If you were to just hike to the summit without doing those acclimatization hikes, you would die. Your body just isn't prepared for that lack of oxygen. Okay. So you arrive at base camp, you spend 1 week to 2 weeks at base camp acclimatizing to that altitude. You then hike 18 miles up the Rongbuk Glacier to advance base camp at 21,300 feet. You spend 2 or 3 days there acclimatizing to that altitude, and then you hike 18 miles back down the Rongbuk Glacier to base camp at 17,000 feet. After recovering for 1 week to 2 weeks, you hike 18 miles back up the Rongbuk Glacier to advance base camp, hike up the north face of Mount Everest to the North Col at 23,000 feet, spend 2 to 3 days there acclimatizing to that altitude, and then you climb back down the north face to advance base camp and hike 18 miles back down to base camp, where you recover 1 week to 2 weeks. You then conduct your third and final acclimatization hike to Camp 2, where you spend 2 to 3 days, and then you climb back and hike back to base camp. That's what occurs during about 6 to 7 weeks of climbing on Mount Everest. Then you go for the summit. And what most people are doing is you're doing this in April and May, these acclimatization hikes, so that you're timing it so that you can attempt the summit right in front of the monsoon. The monsoon is a low pressure system that dumps hundreds of inches of rains at lower elevation and hundreds of feet of snow at the high elevations. But right in front of that low pressure system called the monsoon in that part of the world, it pushes a high pressure system of good weather. And usually it's in the 2 week type of range of relatively good weather at the high altitudes. You do all of your acclimatization hikes in relatively good weather, but it's timed so that when you get to the extreme altitudes, you have the best weather available. The year that my climbing partner and I climbed Mount Everest, and I'm going to get to the punchline here about emotional resiliency. By the time my climbing partner and I had done our acclimatization hikes and attempted the summit, on that particular year, there had been major volcanic eruptions in Iceland. and it had shifted the monsoon. So rather than getting 10 to 14 days of good weather, he and I determined it looked like we were going to get about 5.5 days, maybe 6. And we had to decide, are we going to go to the summit? And he and I immediately decided, yes, we are. And we left immediately from base camp. We achieved the summit 4 days later, where we spent 6 minutes and watched the sunrise over the world. And then in one 36-hour push straight, we arrived at base camp as we raced down the mountain trying to beat the monsoon that would hit shortly thereafter. We arrived at base camp. I dropped my pack 5.5 days, 5.5 hours of sleep during those 5.5 days, 2 packets of oatmeal, individual packets of oatmeal, 2 packets of ramen noodle during that time, a handful of chocolates. I arrived back at base camp. We arrived back at base camp, but I arrived back at base camp, dropped my pack and sat down at 7:24 in the evening. And that photo was taken of me. That's me at 7:28 in the evening. That's 7:24, Eric Kapitulik. That's 7:28, Eric Kapitulik. Now, what happened during those 4 minutes? Most people will say, Cap, you had something to eat during that time. No, what I'm holding in my hand there is a piece of frozen yak. I didn't actually eat it. I just held it up to our Tibetan cook, the man in the red jacket behind me, and said, I'm so hungry, I could eat frozen yak, but I didn't actually eat it. Teammates, the only difference between 7:24 Eric Kapitulik and 7:28 Eric Kapitulik is a decision I made to stop being 7:24 Eric Kapitulik, to stop being that guy, because nobody wants to be around that guy. Nobody does. 7:24 Eric Kapitulik, we can get some stuff done. What's the difference? What's the difference there? It's our emotional resiliency or toughness, whatever word you want to use. An emotional resiliency or toughness allows us to remain mission focused rather than simply being emotionally driven. That's what emotional resiliency allows us to do. It doesn't mean we don't get emotions. That's ridiculous. We're not psychopaths. All of us get natural human emotions: happiness, sadness, anger. As I said, anger typically will lead to negative outcomes. But we all get those natural human emotions. The question is, do those natural human emotions, do we allow them to drive us, or do we stay mission focused with those emotions? How do we do so? How do we ensure that we stay mission focused? How do we ensure that we're emotionally resilient or tough? When we receive those natural human emotions, we take one deep breath. Make it a habit. Be aware of what our natural human emotion is that we're feeling. And sometimes, yes, happiness, we can get too happy, and then all of a sudden something bad happens. But be aware of when you feel anger. Be aware of it in those discussions. You're going to, I do, we do. And take one deep breath. Even better, if you can, take a sip of water. Taking a sip of water or putting an M&M in your mouth. It actually engages a different part of our parasympathetic nervous system, which I won't get into the science with you, but it does actually make it easier to think. And that's the key word. That's what we have to do. We have to think, How do I best respond to this natural human emotion that I'm feeling that will help my team best accomplish its mission? That doesn't mean don't have emotions. No, of course, we're all going to have emotions. But emotionally resilient people, the best teammates and best team leaders, are emotionally resilient. And emotionally resilient people stay mission focused rather than allow themselves to be emotionally driven. What does that mean? It means that we do get natural human emotions, but we take one deep breath, again, or a sip of water, and we think, how do I best respond to this natural human emotion that I'm feeling that will best help my team accomplish its mission? Corey, now, when I say that, though, I think about then the next piece of that would be mission focus, though. And what is that? Can you maybe talk a little bit more about mission focus and what that means? Because I get so fired up just talking about climbing Mount Everest and remaining emotionally resilient that I'm not right now. So I'd like to hear from you about that mission focus piece.
Well, I'll talk about a different aspect of it. I think this all plays into it, but really it's part of our effective communication piece. And if you can, while you're taking that deep breath, and you're having this heated discussion, I won't call it a fierce conversation because I believe those are different things, but you listen first, to understand. And actually, two things you're listening for in this situation. You're listening for the intangible insults. There's going to be a lot of them. If you're having a heated discussion, well, you haven't done this, and we didn't get this deadline because your team didn't accomplish X on time. So you're hearing all of the intangible insults, and you're putting those in a box. And then you're looking for, and this is what you're searching for, is that tangible concern. What's the real problem? What's the real issue here underneath this blanket of intangible insults that I'm getting fired at me almost as an offensive weapon so that I cave in and lose the argument? Once you find that tangible concern, that's what we hold on to and address it. And the ironic thing about this is this Q&A has been scheduled for weeks. But this morning, we had a call with one of our corporate clients where there was a litany of intangible insults being thrown at the corporate leader. And this is a leader that had been in the business for 30 years, talking to one of his employees. And the real tangible concern finally came to the surface. And it's they hadn't had a pay issue addressed that they had brought up, like, I think it was months ago, if not a year ago. A guy on the team hadn't been paid the way he should have been paid. And there was a whole litany of other things that were used as ammunition, but the underlying issue was hadn't been paid. The leader keys in on that as a tangible concern, takes action on it that day. The employee is paid, and we can put that issue to bed. A heated conversation that if you reacted to every single one of those intangible insults without listening to understand, it would have gone down a different road, and it would not have been a productive conversation.
That piece, Corey, that you just highlighted about listening to understand, that's like taking one deep breath. None of us are born that way. We're born that if you attack me, I attack you back, whether that's verbally or physically, right? So we have to train ourselves, make that a habit to take one deep breath, being aware of our emotions and taking that one deep breath. We also have to make it a habit to listen to understand. Rather than listen to response. That's really, we always talk, so many people talk about the importance, talk about the importance of being an effective communicator. And this isn't a conversation about what to do of that, although we're certainly happy to do another one of these about effective communication. But however, we think effective communication and all of us think about how we talk, when in fact, how we listen is much more important.
And Cap, I would like to throw in there that you have highlighted the analogy I used, or the metaphor I used, that pretend you're on that first date.
Yeah.
And you always say this in front of clients. And I actually, now I like it too. But pretend you're listening like you're on that first date. You're hanging on every word. You're taking mental notes, thinking, oh, I can bring this up later maybe, and that'll get me some points later. And if you treat conversations like that with your teammates, and especially folks that may work for you, maybe some of your peers, that is going to build up that capital and that I don't know, leadership capital that later you can use when you're trying to drive the team in a tough direction, in a challenging direction. But listen,
it
like
shows
you're
you
on that
care.
first date.
It shows you care.
It does. And it's against our instinct. And when we can look at it like this, to understand it fully, we can listen a whole, I mean, we're listening to 400 words a minute. People can only speak at what, about 100 words a minute, Cap?
Yeah, I think it's about 150 words a minute the average person speaks, but we have the brain capacity to listen to 350 to 400 words.
Yeah, so we think we can do other things. And so we're listening, but we're not really. And then we're thinking about our response, and then we're thinking about our to-do list and our cell phone and all those other things. That's why we have to force ourselves and make the habit trigger.
Yeah.
When you know you're going to get distracted, you know you're going to start to wander, focus in and listen to understand, not to respond.
To help us figure out, as you were saying, the tangible concern, not the intangible insults specifically, as it pertains to how being a more emotionally resilient or tough helps us with our conflict resolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Cap, we have a really good question up here on the board. Do you want to go ahead and transition?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So this question actually ties right into what we discussed in the first 10 minutes of this session, which seems like 30 minutes ago. But how are companies developing behavioral standards in their organizations? And then the second part is, how do they create buy-in among their teams? So I'll say it again, because as I'm saying it, I'm processing it. How are companies developing behavioral standards in their organizations? So developing standards and then creating the buy-in among their teams.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let the person who's a pro at this answer the question. I mean, our book, Corey, when I wrote the book with Jake McDonald, we broke the book up into 7 sections, and every section highlights one of our major contributor teammates of the program. The first section, we use teammate Corey Ross's story about when he was stationed in Eastern Afghanistan in the first section of the book. That first section is about, and what the question really is about, is how do we create a world-class culture? And when I listen to understand that question, I hear, how do we create a world-class culture? And being that I've heard you present to corporations throughout not just the US, but Mexico numerous times, throughout North America, Corey, there's nobody better placed to answer that than you. So I'd love for you to take that.
Yeah, and I'll just take it in order. And this comes from Chris, one of our viewers today. Standards is really what's important about developing standards is that it's a choice. And so they're very clearly defined. They have to reinforce our values, which is who we are. So first question is, what standards are going to reinforce these core values and actually get people to behave the way we need them to behave to reach our goals? So then I'm introducing a new term here, goals. So how do goals differ from standards? Well, the first thing is pretty obvious about goals is anybody can have goals. Every team in America, every corporate team, every athletic team, and just about any family has goals at whatever economic level they're at. People want to have a nice car. People want to maybe pay that car off someday, graduate from high school, get into a secondary level of education, or send their kids off to school, off to college. These are all goals, and they're all relatively easy to have goals. Elite teams have both goals and standards. And when you hear people say things in society today about the kids these days, it drives us crazy at the program. You won't hear anybody at the program, none of my teammates, say the words kids these days in that negative, nasally tone. We don't do it because we don't believe that kids these days are the problem. You see, I happen to know that the kids these days are the same as the kids these days were back in our parents' and our grandparents' generations. Their DNA is the same. I had a 19-year-old kid bring me home safely from Afghanistan. I had other kids these days on my team that performed and met and exceeded the expectations on the worst day of their lives. And so I happen to know that they're no different. It's us who are different. The parents, teachers, coaches, and business leaders who have confused what a goal is and what a standard is. You see, our goals are what we want to achieve, and we need to have goals. But to quote one of our partners with the program, I think it was Fred Kaufman that said, goals are, I don't want to put words in his mouth. He said, they're almost secondary, though, to standards, because having standards, that's behavior based. Goals are what we want to achieve. But if we have standards and we spend time developing them, our goals will come. We'll naturally be achieving our goals if our behaviors on a daily basis meet and exceed our standards, which again, reinforce those core values. So how do we develop those standards? Go to the team. Once you've decided who you are as a company, go to the team and your best people and have them develop those standards that reinforce the core values, the culture of the company. That gets to the second part of the question, which is, how do you get commitment? Well, if I develop the standard, I'm going to be more likely to be committed to it. And so we talked earlier about, these standards are commitments. They're commitments to my teammates. And when I break one of those, it's not just that I'm breaking something to what you said, Cap, an entity. No, I'm breaking a commitment to my teammates.
That's right.
That I presumably care about. And that if I don't care about them, I probably don't belong here. So to get that commitment, have your best people create those standards, develop standards, and then refine them. Over time, those standards may change. They may get higher. 5 years from now, the standards of your company should be higher, or else you're getting worse as a company. Anything to add to that first question, Cap?
No, Corey, you hit the nail right on the head there with it. I think that highlighting the difference, I think a lot of people will misconstrue rules with standards. And instead of having a few basic standards that are non-negotiables, they come up with 100 different rules that nobody can remember.
Yeah.
And it really, that importance of, hey, these are our core values as an organization, as a team. This is who we are. This is how we define it for our team. And then we do this every day. Mm-hmm. And that shows that we don't just say that we're selfless, tough, and disciplined in the program's value system. We do this every day because this is what we've committed to each other that reinforces those value system. And again, as we were talking about earlier, Corey, before we really even started today's conversation in Q&A, was, boy, parents missed the boat on this with their own children.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about kids these days. No, every parent gives their kids lots of goals, and it's good. But world-class families have goals and standards. World-class schools, athletic teams, military units, corporations. The world-class ones have goals and standards. Mm-hmm. Now, Corey, one of the things though that's interesting that I did think about as you said this, because I've heard this before. I've been asked this question and would like to hear your thoughts about it, because we work with a number of multinational companies mm-hmm. who there are cultural differences in Asia and America and Africa and Europe. When you have people and really, you don't even need to be a multinational to have different cultures in an organization. But mm-hmm. we always hear about the power of diversity, mm-hmm. and I we got two white males here, both with short hair, right, skin hair, stuff like that. We actually, if you saw our entire team, I think it reflects the importance that we put on diversity and the belief we have in the power of it. But I think people confuse diversity with that 100 different values. We value everything. Mm-hmm. And we absolutely have great diversity in where people come from, the color of their skin, their socioeconomic background, their geographic background. All of these things really add it's such a combat multiplier, if I could use a military term, to our team, but not diversity in our values, where people come from different places, have different backgrounds, different upbringings. It doesn't mean that they have a completely different value system. Anything to add to that, Corey?
Yeah, I would say two things. Number one, who we are as a company oftentimes is written on a document. It's written on our website. It's about our team, something like that. Our purpose, our vision, and our mission, and then our core values is a standard way of expressing who we are on paper. Whether or not we're living and breathing those core values as a corporation is up for debate. And if we have established solid standards and standards that we can really hold each other accountable to, both positive and negative, that will help us live and breathe our core values. If you're looking to join an organization and right off the bat, you see that the values don't align with your values, you're joining an organization that's going to be an uphill battle for you to stay a part of.
Yeah.
So you can have your own personal values, and man, that's probably the most important thing to an individual is their values and their beliefs. So if you look at that organization, and yeah, mine aren't the same, but they're similar, and I can get behind, for the program, selfless, tough, and disciplined. Yeah, I can see that as being something that's important to an elite team. Okay, I'm going to be those things. That my personal values may be slightly different, but if disciplined is just not something I believe in, I'm not joining that organization. And that organization is not going to really accept me over the long term. There's going to be a constant battle over, hey, look, we need you to be more disciplined in your communications. And then the second time, it's going to be some kind of more harsh, accountability. And so I would say that, yes, we can all have our own individual values, but when it comes to the corporate values, we've got to align that and be able to accept that they may be slightly different from our own.
Yeah.
That being
said, maybe even enhance them, our personal values, and enhancing them as
Yeah. And here's one thing. Maybe the corporation isn't living their core values. Maybe folks at the company have it written on paper. It's written on the walls of the buildings as you walk in, but they're not living them. That's when your integrity or your personal core values could help that entire organization turn around. And so that's where I would say that you could bring your values into an organization for the good and not to, have a conflict in values. So that's in response, I think, to one of the questions we got prior to this webinar was how do we lead global teams with different values, ethics, and morals? So that would be our response to that. Cap, I want to throw another question out there for us to maybe both respond to. One about accountability, and this comes from a person who leads a team of 12 salespeople. This is, by his or her account, a great team of people. They spend time with each other. They all get along, good people. However, the leader who submitted this question feels like they're the only person on the team that holds anybody accountable to their standards. And they're feeling fatigue by that. They always feel like the bad guy. So the question here is, how do I get others on my team to hold each other accountable so that it's not always me? And I know that you've talked to me about this in the past. I know. So it's not a sore subject. It's a daily subject with us at the program and with the clients that we work with.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Corey, because I think what teammates will typically say is, God, I need the leader to be more positive. And that is a true statement. If you're the leader of your team, every day you show up, you come in with a great positive attitude, ready to attack the day. Your team will have that same, it will embody that. Come into work with, oh, this is rough, this is bad, we're not doing this, you're doing that wrong, you're doing this wrong. The team's going to embody that negativity. That's the power of influence. And we have always got to remember it. Now, leadership, as John Maxwell says, is influence. That's how he defines leadership. And I would agree with it. We would agree with it. But just because you have influence, that does not make you a leader. As we highlight in our book, in a desire and ability to use that influence, that does make you a leader. But if you have influence, you have a desire and an ability to use it, and you are doing so, realize the power of that influence. You set the tone for your organization. So the organization, the members of that organization, they recognize that and go, oh God, I want our leader to be more positive, him or her to be more positive. Okay. However, the leader, if nobody's going to correct when people aren't honoring their commitments, ultimately the leader must. Because if the leader doesn't, then you stand for nothing as an organization. You stand for nothing. And standing for nothing is as bad as trying to stand for everything. It's meaningless. Oh, you might be able to make money in the short term, but you're going out of business. End of story. End of story. So we must honor our commitments to each other. Again, without our doing so, we have no relationship. Ultimately, the leader will be held accountable for it. And if they do a poor job of it, typically means the dissolution of that team. Mm-hmm. But the group is correct about the leader setting the tone. And boy, the leader's coming in here, it's very negative, always, and everything else. The leader's truth is, look, I would love to be more positive, mm-hmm. but I need somebody who's going to then hold each other accountable to our commitments. I think one of the mistakes that leaders do is they continuously just challenge the entire team to do it, the entire team to do it, the entire team to do it. And maybe we will get there at some point. Mm-hmm. But look, what will allow the leader to come into the organization and be more positive initially, just get one other person to help it. Mm-hmm. Just develop, mentor one other person in your organization, and make no mistake about it and say, look, if you can do this well, and by the way, when we hold each other accountable to our commitments, that does mean when people are not honoring them, but we have to make sure that we mentor that individual and encourage them, educate them on the fact that as a leader, you must also hold people accountable when they are meeting those commitments. We have to celebrate when people are honoring those commitments. Mm-hmm. But instead of trying to work with the entire team and challenge the entire team, select one person that you think might have the best opportunity, who may have, as I said earlier, has a lot of influence, seems like they have a desire and an ability to use it, mm-hmm. and develop them. All of us need development, regardless of where we are in our careers. Captain TJ Grady, I was looking through the attendee list really quickly, see some names that jumped out at me. TJ's name, former Navy soccer captain of a ship, just about retiring. He and I have had this conversation. A mistake many admirals make is they think, oh God, they're a captain, CEO of a ship. They're good. Nope. No. We're here to develop our people, regardless of where they are in their career. As a leader, it's really, if not the most important job you have, boy, it should be in the top handful, mm-hmm. right? So for that individual that asked that question, Corey, really what I would say is, yes, it's a challenge, no doubt, as a leader. And ultimately, you have to hold people accountable to their commitments. The buck does stop with you. However, your team will be better for it, as that leader has recognized, if they're not the only person who does it. I think number one, as you said earlier, make sure they're not just his or her standards. Ensure that they're the team's commitments to each other, number one. Number two, develop one person. Maybe, hey, great if you have two, but develop one person to help you hold people accountable if they're not honoring those commitments, which would allow the leader then to be able to recognize just when people are honoring their commitments.
Yeah, and the words you wrote in the book, hold best accountable, have always stuck with me. You know, there's a reason you call them your best people. You've seen something in them, and you're talking about that one person you're going to take and develop. And then hold best accountable when the team fails. When one person on the team fails, nobody says something. That I'm having a conversation with my culture carriers, my culture warriors after that meeting. I'm saying, how'd you allow this to occur? Great point,
yeah.
Cap.
Yeah.
We have a question about motivation. And I like this one because it immediately sparked a quick answer, not the full answer. But the question is, I've tried everything to motivate my people. We just seem to be in a rut. There's no innovation. Mediocre work, just getting through the workday. What can I do to motivate them?
Yeah. So if it sparked a quick one on you, just in the interest of time, we want to be respectful of everybody's time today. Really appreciate everybody joining us today, and in an interest of being respectful for your time, we've got less than 6 minutes to answer it. So I'd love, so hit it.
Yeah. Quick answer. I got this from one of our longtime clients the other day. And he said, well, Corey, my team is motivated by money. So I laughed out loud because I'm also motivated by money, which means that I think a lot of people would respond to financial incentives, to doing the behaviors you expect them to do on a daily basis. And Cap, we've done this over time. It's not a perfect science, but to incentivize behaviors you want to see. Many companies don't do that. They incentivize, at the end of the year, everybody gets a bonus. You can expect to get a bonus if you work at this company. Well, okay, but what am I incentivizing there? Is it tied to a behavior? If I don't do something, do I get less bonus? Okay, how about sales commissions? If I sell, I get commissions. Okay, yeah, but did you have the behavior that caused us to get that sale? How much did you have to do with it? One of our previous commission structures was how much work you do equals how much a percentage you get of that sales commission. And I love that because, hey, you want to do more work, have it. And that's what we're doing right now at the program. You can choose to do all of the sales work and maximize your commission, which would be a pretty good slice of the overall revenue. Or you can just get the new client, turn it over to the sales team, and get a smaller commission. Either way, you make the choice, and we're driving the behaviors that we want to see. So that's my short answer,
Yeah.
Cap.
Yeah. The thing that I might just add very quickly to that is, as leaders, we have to always be cognizant that the achievement of goals on most teams and in America, God bless it, capitalistic society, the achievement of goals is systemically rewarded. Mm-hmm. Think back to when you're a high school, college athlete, you score the most goals. The newspaper reporter wants to stick a microphone in your face after. You get to be put in the newspaper, your photos taken, right? You got lots of friends, you got, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it might be, right? Significant others. It's systemic in our democracy to be rewarded for the achievement of goals. And you should be. But world-class teams recognize the achievement of goals and standards. Yes, they recognize when they aren't met, but the world-class organizations recognize when they are. Where it's almost systemic that you're going to do that with goals. Make sure that we do that with standards as well. Yes, you're going to have an MVP. Yes, they should receive financial benefits for that. But make sure that if you're going to say, hey, we're a selfless organization, we put the team first, make sure your compensation plan reflects that and doesn't reflect just the MVP outselling everybody, because people then are incentivized to just outsell everybody and not put the team first. So many organizations do that wrong. Number one. Number two, if you're going to say truly, this is who we are, and this is important for us, make sure that we recognize that. Can you recognize it financially? Probably. I mean, just as a suggestion, a bonus plan based on profits at the end of the year, there should be some percentage of that which is discretionary. Use, as a leader, make sure that you're using that discretionary amount on those individuals who were truly selfless, tough, and disciplined. As in this case, I'm using our core values, but whatever your organization, whatever you've said, this is important to us. And then don't ever forget the importance of just recognizing people in front of others. Don't ever forget to do it. Though that recognition is so vitally important to help keep people motivated to attack tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
Cap, thank you for closing that out. And what I'd like to do is I'll close this session by just saying, we always want to hear your feedback, and we're open to questions anytime. So if you reached out with a question about for this corporate Q&A, please, on social media or just through direct email, send us other questions, and that could steer and drive some of the topics that we choose for our next Q&A. So we're going to sign off now, but I appreciate everybody who joined us virtually, and then also folks that submitted questions prior to.
And Corey, we'll be sending a link to this to attendees and everybody else, and please feel free to forward that invitation to view this to any friends, family members that you would think they would find impactful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Corey. Great job.
Thank you.